So now let's focus on keeping track of the numbers behind reaching our service initiatives. And let's talk about service accounting. Now I know most of you have backgrounds that deal with construction accounting or percent complete accounting. I got to tell you something. These two animals have nothing to do with each other. The way that you track accounting inside of a percent complete environment is completely different than you track it in service. Now the guys who do plumbing, the guys who do HVAC, they've been in the service game a lot longer than us, and they really do understand that it's not about tracking the profitability of each job number or each ticket that you have out there. The focus is on the sales that each of the units or trucks or crews or whatever you want to call it generates. Now, one thing that most people don't take into effect is that for each service unit that you have on the road, you have about $100,000 in cost. That's $66,000 for the guy by the time you pay him workman's comp, all that good stuff, and $33,000 just for the vehicle. And that includes insurance, depreciation, gas, cell phone, whatever else it takes to put that unit on the street. So $100,000 in direct overhead for each service unit that you have out there. That equates to, in a 50-week year, that equates to $2,000 every week. So if you're billing $3,000 a week, you're making $1,000. That's it. You have to overcome that $2,000 before you begin to make anything. The focus needs to be on sales per unit. Now, the way that the proper gross margin is achieved is by pricing as much as possible off of pricing lists. Pricing lists control what pricing is. Sometimes we have to add a little bit more, but we have a starting point so that we can measure gross margin across all of the units. Okay, we track the gross margin of units per month, per week, how many materials were put in, how much labor was put in, and how much sales was produced for each of the individual units. If across the board our gross margin is low, we need to raise our prices. It's pretty much that simple, all the way across the board. Change your price list, raise your prices. That simple. Now you might say, oh, there's a lot of customers that I'd lose if I raise my prices. Well, I got a great piece of advice. Raise your prices 15% and fire 5% of your worst customers. Okay? Service requires money. Service requires margin. And when you're inside of that environment, you need to be making 60, 70, 80% margin to cover the cost of that unit. So here's some big picture numbers. Let's say that you have a unit that bills $3,000 a week. Wow, that sounds like a lot of money, doesn't it? $3,000 week after week. Well, again, in 50 weeks, it's going to bill $150,000. The unit costs $100. You just made $50. And that has to cover the overhead of the dispatcher, of the girls who do the invoicing, and your whole building. You don't make any money at $3,000 per week. You begin to cover costs, period. In order to make money in service, it starts with $3,500, $4,000, and $5,000 per week per unit. If you ever stack up 2 units on the same project, guess what? You'll never do twice the sales. It will never happen in a million years. 2 units probably gets you 1.5 times the sales. Don't ever take one of the units off the street to help another unit finish the sales. Each of the units has to hit their sales goals, $4,000, $5,000 a week, right? $5,000 a week produces $250,000 worth of sales for that unit. Now $100,000 goes to the direct overhead. There's $150,000 left. You got to spend 15% on materials. You might have a helper involved, and maybe you make $100,000 for the whole unit. I know what you're saying. I make $100,000 off of one freaking re-roof. I get it. But the way you make service isn't with one unit. You make money with 10 units. Because 10 units doing $100,000 worth of profit is $1 million. And it doesn't take a lot to manage after the system gets put in place and it's reoccurring revenue. And that's what builds value inside of your organization. Join us next week when we talk about finding the customers that you need to get your hands on to be able to maintain those margins that make sense so that you can cover the costs that you have inside a service and make a decent profit. Once again, raise your prices 15%, fire 5% of your customers. The best advice I could ever give you. See you next week.